The thunder rattled the window panes of Rose Kinsley's small rented room as she clutched her 6-month-old son to her chest, the storm outside mirroring the tempest in her heart. Montana Territory, 1878, had shown her little mercy since she'd fled St. Louis 8 months ago, heavy with child and lighter one wedding ring. Now, as rain pounded against the rickety roof of the boarding house in Silver Creek, Rose knew she had only one desperate option left, one final journey to find the man who didn't know he had a son. The journey from Silver Creek to Whitetail Ranch took 3 grueling days by stagecoach. Baby James fussed constantly, earning disapproving glances from the other passengers. Rose's threadbare traveling dress had once belonged to a woman of means, but now it hung loosely on her frame, a reminder of all she had lost. She clutched a worn letter in her pocket, the only evidence she had that Zachary Lawson still resided at his family's ranch, the place where they had met just over a year ago, when she had been passing through with her father on business. Last stop before Whitetail. The driver's voice boomed as the coach rumbled to a halt at a dusty trading post. Rose climbed down carefully, holding James close. His wisps of dark hair, so like his father's, peeked from beneath the small cap she'd knitted during sleepless nights. "That's quite a little one you got there," remarked an old man rocking on the porch. "You headed to see family?" "Something like that," Rose replied, her voice barely audible over the creak of the man's chair. "Well, you best hurry on. Looks like another storm brewing." He pointed toward dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Whitetail's still a good ride from here." Rose felt her heart sink. "How far?" "About 15 miles. Won't make it before dark, I reckon." 15 miles. With a baby. And no horse. Is there anyone heading that way who might offer a ride?" she asked, desperation edging her voice. The old man shook his head. "Not today, miss. Most folks are battening down for the storm." Rose fought back tears as she bounced James gently in her arms. One more obstacle. One more impossibility. Yet she had come this far, she would not turn back now. "I'll pay," she said, reaching for the small coin purse that contained nearly all she had left in the world. "For a horse. Or a wagon. Anything." The old man's eyes softened. "No need for that. My grandson's due back any minute with supplies. He might take you, if you don't mind riding with farm goods." True to his word, within the hour, Rose found herself perched beside a gangly youth of perhaps 16, with James secured in a makeshift sling across her chest, and the wagon loaded with sacks of grain and barrels of goods. "Never been to Whitetail myself," the boy chatted as they set off. "Heard they got some fine horses, though. You visiting the Lawsons?" Rose's breath caught. "You know them?" "Everyone knows of them. Old man Lawson built that ranch from nothing. His son runs it now, Zachary, I think. Folks say he's got the best eye for horseflesh in 3 territories." Rose nodded, remembering the passionate way Zach had spoken of his horses during their brief acquaintance. How his dark eyes had lit up when discussing bloodlines and training techniques. How those same eyes had looked into hers with such intensity that she'd felt her entire world shift on its axis. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm going to see Mr. Lawson." The road to Whitetail proved more treacherous than anticipated. The looming storm arrived with sudden fury, forcing them to seek shelter in an abandoned line shack for several hours. By the time they reached the long drive leading to the ranch house, night had fallen completely, and rain was coming down in steady sheets. "Can't go no further, madam," the boy apologized. "Need to get these supplies back before the creek floods. The main house is just up that way, can't miss it." Rose thanked him profusely, pressing a precious coin into his palm despite his protests. Then, with James tucked securely against her, she began the trudge up the muddy drive. The Lawson ranch house emerged from the darkness like a ship at sea, windows glowing with lamplight, smoke curling from stone chimneys. It was larger than Rose remembered from her brief visit, more imposing. For a moment, her courage faltered. What right did she have to appear on this man's doorstep after nearly a year of silence? What if he turned them away? But James squirmed against her, his tiny face scrunching with hunger and discomfort, and Rose knew there was no choice. They needed shelter, food, and help. Even if Zachary Lawson rejected her, surely he wouldn't turn away his own son. The broad wooden porch offered blessed relief from the rain. Rose paused, trying to compose herself, to find some dignified way to announce her presence. But her sodden clothes clung to her skin, her hair hung in dripping strands, and her legs threatened to give way after the long journey. With trembling fingers, she raised her hand and knocked firmly on the heavy door. Silence followed, then footsteps, the sound of a latch turning. The door swung open, revealing Zachary Lawson. A year had changed him. His face was leaner, more weathered, a scar now marking his left cheek. But his eyes were the same, deep brown and intense, widening now in recognition and shock. "Rose?" he whispered, as though speaking to a ghost. Before she could respond, James gave a small cry, squirming in his damp blankets. Zachary's gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms, his expression transforming from shock to something unreadable as he took in the tiny face that bore his own features in miniature. Time seemed suspended between them. Rain pattered against the porch roof. Somewhere inside, a clock ticked steadily. Rose began, her carefully rehearsed speech deserting her. "We had nowhere else to go." Zachary reached out one calloused hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the baby's cheek. James turned toward the touch, his dark eyes Zachary's eyes blinking up at this stranger. "I missed his first word," Zachary whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "But not his life." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, Rose. Come home." The warmth of the house enveloped Rose like an embrace as she stepped across the threshold. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, flames dancing cheerfully despite the gloom outside. Rich carpets covered the wooden floors, and well-made furniture spoke of comfort and prosperity. "You're soaked through," Zachary said, closing the door against the storm. His voice sounded different, more controlled now, but with an underlying tension that made Rose's stomach tighten with apprehension. "I'm sorry to arrive like this," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The stagecoach only went as far as the trading post, and then Mrs. Hargrove," Zachary called, cutting off her explanation. An older woman appeared from what Rose presumed was the kitchen, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a cap, her expression curious as she took in the bedraggled visitors. "This is Rose Kinsley," and Zachary paused, his gaze returning to the baby. "James," Rose supplied. "James Zachary Kinsley." Something flickered in Zachary's eyes at the name. "Mrs. Hargrove, please show Miss Kinsley to the guest room and help her with whatever she needs. And have Jeb bring up hot water for a bath." "Of course, Mr. Lawson." The housekeeper approached Rose with a kind smile. "Come with me, dear. We'll get you," and the little one dried off. Rose hesitated, looking back at Zachary. "I know we need to talk tomorrow," he said firmly. "You're exhausted, and the baby needs care. We'll talk in the morning." Rose followed Mrs. Hargrove up a broad staircase, grateful for the woman's gentle efficiency. The guest room proved to be larger than the entire boarding house room she'd left behind. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, covered in a colorful quilt. A small fireplace, already lit, warmed the space. "Now then," Mrs. Hargrove said, helping Rose remove her wet cloak. "Let's see to this little gentleman while the bath is prepared." The housekeeper's experienced hands made quick work of unwrapping James and changing him into a soft flannel cloth that she produced from a cupboard. "We keep supplies for when Mr. Lawson's sister visits with her children," she explained. "You're very kind," Rose said, fighting back tears of gratitude as she watched her son, clean and dry, kicking happily on the big bed. Mrs. Hargrove gave her a thoughtful look. "The little one has the Lawson eyes." Rose tensed, but the woman merely smiled. "The bath will be up shortly. There are night clothes in the dresser. They might be large, but they're clean and dry. I'll bring some warm milk for the baby and something for you to eat." Left alone with James, Rose sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. She had done it, found Zachary, brought his son to him. But what now? His reaction had been unreadable. He hadn't turned them away, but neither had he welcomed them with open arms. By the time she had bathed and changed into the borrowed nightgown, her eyelids were heavy with exhaustion. Mrs. Hargrove returned with a tray of food and a small bottle of warm milk, along with instructions for breakfast the following morning. "Mr. Lawson often rides out early," she said, "but he's asked to see you in his study after breakfast." Rose nodded, trying to interpret this information. Was he giving her time to rest, or avoiding her? She fed James, who fell asleep almost immediately afterward, his little face peaceful for the first time in days. Rose placed him in the center of the big bed, surrounding him with pillows to prevent him from rolling off, then ate her own meal, a simple but hearty stew with fresh bread that tasted better than anything she'd had in months. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, in this strange house belonging to the father of her child, a man she had known for barely 2 weeks, yet who had changed her life forever, Rose finally allowed herself to rest. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, the storm having cleared during the night. Rose awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until James's babbling beside her brought reality rushing back. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, which Mrs. Hargrove had somehow managed to wash and press overnight, then carried James downstairs. The housekeeper directed her to a sunny breakfast room where a place had been set at the table. "Mr. Lawson has already ridden out to check for storm damage," she explained, serving Rose eggs and bacon that made her mouth water. "He'll return mid-morning." Rose tried to hide her disappointment. Part of her had hoped that Zachary would be waiting, eager to spend time with his son, but perhaps he needed space to adjust to this sudden change in his life. After breakfast, Mrs. Hargrove showed Rose around the main floor of the house, the formal parlor, dining room, and Zachary's study. The housekeeper spoke fondly of the ranch and its master, filling in the gaps of Rose's knowledge about Zachary's life since they parted. "His father passed 6 months ago," Mrs. Hargrove explained as they walked. "It was expected. Old Mr. Lawson had been ailing for years, but it hit the young master hard all the same. He's been running the ranch alone since then." Rose felt a pang of sympathy. She knew well the pain of losing a parent, having buried her own father just 2 months after leaving Montana Territory. "And there's no Mrs. Lawson?" she asked carefully. Mrs. Hargrove gave her a shrewd look. "No, miss. There have been plenty who tried for the position, especially since Mr. Lawson became sole owner of Whitetail. But he's shown no interest." They were interrupted by the sound of boots on the porch. Mrs. Hargrove excused herself to prepare coffee, leaving Rose alone in the study when Zachary entered. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame filling the space. Daylight revealed what darkness had hidden, the lines of fatigue and responsibility etched into his face, the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples despite his being only 28 years old. His gaze went immediately to James, who sat on Rose's lap, playing with a wooden spoon Mrs. Hargrove had given him. "He's grown so much," Zachary said quietly, stepping into the room. Rose blinked in confusion. "You've never seen him before yesterday." Zachary set his hat aside and crossed to a desk drawer, from which he withdrew a folded letter. He handed it to Rose. "This came 3 months ago," he said, "from a Mrs. Delaney in St. Louis." Rose gasped. "My landlady. She wrote that you had given birth to a son, my son, that you were struggling but too proud to ask for help." His voice tightened. "She included a small drawing of him." "I never knew," Rose whispered, scanning the letter. "I had already left St. Louis by then. I tried to find you, sent telegrams, hired men to look." Frustration colored his words. "By the time I traced you to Silver Creek, you had already left." Rose stared at him in astonishment. "You were looking for us?" "Of course I was looking for you," Zachary said, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "The moment I learned I had a child," he broke off, visibly collecting himself. "Rose, why didn't you tell me? When you discovered you were expecting, why didn't you write?" Rose lowered her gaze, the old pain surfacing. "I did write. 3 letters. They were never answered." "I never received any letters from you," Zachary said, his voice hard with certainty. "After you left with your father, I waited. Every day, I expected word." "But my father said—" Rose stopped abruptly, a horrible suspicion forming. "What did your father say?" Zachary asked quietly. "That he had delivered my letters personally to your ranch hand. That you had sent a reply declining any responsibility." She swallowed hard. "He showed me a letter. A forgery." Zachary's voice was flat. "Your father made his opinion of me quite clear during your visit. He called me an uneducated cowboy with delusions of grandeur." Rose closed her eyes briefly, the pieces falling into place. Her father, determined that his daughter would make an advantageous marriage to restore the family fortunes, had eliminated the threat of Zachary Lawson. By the time Rose discovered she was expecting, they were back in St. Louis, and her father was already arranging introductions to suitable bachelors. When I refused to consider any of the men he selected, when I insisted on keeping the baby, he disowned me, she said quietly. He died of apoplexy 2 months later. Zachary's expression softened. Despite their estrangement, he knew she had loved her father. I'm sorry, Rose. James chose that moment to drop his spoon and let out a frustrated wail. The tension in the room broken. Zachary hesitantly approached and crouched before Rose's chair. May I? He asked, extending his arms toward the baby. Rose nodded, her throat tight with emotion as she transferred James to his father's arms. The baby looked startled for a moment, then reached up to pat Zachary's face with curious fingers. Hello, James, Zachary said, his voice gentle in a way Rose had never heard before. I'm your pa. James babbled in response, a stream of nonsense sounds that nevertheless brought a smile to Zachary's face. He's perfect, he said, looking up at Rose with eyes that shone with unmistakable pride. You did this all on your own. You're remarkable. The simple praise, after months of struggle and judgment, broke something in Rose. To her mortification, tears began streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said, hastily wiping at her cheeks. It's just been so hard, and I was so afraid you would turn us away. Never, Zachary said firmly. This is your home now, Rose. Yours and James's. If you'll stay, stay, Rose repeated, hardly daring to hope for what his words implied. I want to know my son, Zachary said, shifting James to a more comfortable position against his shoulder. And I want to know you again, Rose. Properly this time, without your father's interference or the constraints of propriety that limited us before. As what? Rose asked, needing clarity. Your housekeeper? The mother of your child? As my wife, Zachary said simply. If you'll have me. Rose stared at him in disbelief. You cannot mean that. You barely know me. I know enough, Zachary countered. I know you're brave and determined. I know you traveled across half the country alone with an infant rather than give up on him having a father. I know that the 2 weeks I spent in your company last year were the most alive I've ever felt. He paused. And I know that I've thought of you every day since. It's too soon, Rose protested, though her heart leapt at his words. We need time we have in abundance, Zachary agreed. I'm not suggesting we marry tomorrow, Rose. Stay here, let me get to know my son, let us get to know each other again. If, after some months have passed, you find you cannot envision a future with me, I will provide for you and James wherever you wish to settle. It was a generous offer, more than generous. And yet, I don't want charity, Zachary. It isn't charity to provide for my son, he said firmly. And it isn't charity to court a woman I admire and respect. James, growing restless in his father's arms, began to fuss. Rose automatically reached for him, and as she took the baby, her fingers brushed against Zachary's. Even that slight contact sent a spark of awareness through her, a reminder of the connection that had formed so quickly between them a year ago. 3 months, she said finally. We'll stay for 3 months. Then we'll decide. Zachary's smile transformed his face, erasing years of worry and responsibility. 3 months it is. And I promise you, Rose Kinsley, I intend to make them count. The days that followed took on a rhythm unlike any Rose had known. Mornings began early at Whitetail Ranch, with Zachary often gone before dawn to work with the horses or cattle. Rose would breakfast with James, then spend the morning exploring the house and grounds or helping Mrs. Hargrove with household tasks, not because it was expected, but because idleness had never suited her. Zachary made a point of returning for the midday meal, during which he would hold James and tell Rose about his morning's work. He spoke of the ranch's operations with obvious pride, but also sought her opinions on matters both practical and personal. I've been considering expanding the orchard, he mentioned one sunny afternoon as they walked together. James balanced on Zachary's shoulder. The apples do well here, and there's growing demand from the mining towns. What about peaches? Rose suggested. My grandmother always said Montana peaches, when you can get them, have a sweetness that can't be matched. Zachary looked at her with interest. I hadn't considered peaches. The growing season's shorter, but it might work with the right varieties. He shifted James to his other shoulder. Would you ride out with me tomorrow to look at the land I'm considering? Mrs. Hargrove would watch James. Rose hesitated. She hadn't been on horseback since before James was born. I'm afraid I'm out of practice, she admitted. We could take the buggy, Zachary offered. Or, a gleam appeared in his eye. We could ride double, like we did that day at the creek. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks at the memory. During her previous visit, Zachary had taken her riding to a secluded spot by a creek on Whitetail land. They had shared their first kiss there, seated together on his horse after a picnic lunch. I think the buggy would be more proper, she said primly, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. Zachary laughed, the sound rich and warm. As you wish, Miss Kinsley. Though I feel obliged to point out that propriety is somewhat moot when we already have a child together. Rose gave him a mock stern look. All the more reason to be circumspect now. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, each of them wary of missteps. Rose learned that Zachary, for all his outward confidence, harbored deep-seated doubts about his ability to be a good father, having lost his own at a crucial age. Zachary discovered that beneath Rose's composed exterior lay a quick wit and adventurous spirit that years of her father's strict upbringing had failed to extinguish. And always between them was James, growing and changing daily. At 7 months, he began pulling himself up on furniture, his determined little face so like his father's that it made Rose's heart ache. He has your stubbornness, she told Zachary one evening as they watched James repeatedly attempt to reach a wooden horse on a table beyond his grasp. And your persistence, Zachary countered, smiling as the baby tried yet again. He doesn't give up, no matter how many times he falls. They were sitting together on the porch swing, enjoying the cool evening air after a particularly hot summer day. James played on a quilt at their feet, the space between them comfortable in a way that still surprised Rose. I received a letter today, Zachary said, his tone deliberately casual, from the territorial governor. He's considering me for appointment as county commissioner. Zachary, that's wonderful, Rose exclaimed. What an honor. It would mean more responsibilities, more time away from the ranch. He hesitated. I'm not sure I should accept. Rose studied his profile in the fading light. Why not? You've mentioned wanting to improve the roads and bridges in this area. As commissioner, you could make that happen. The timing isn't ideal, with James still so young and the ranch expanding. He glanced at her, and us still finding our way. Understanding dawned. You're concerned about how it would affect our arrangement. Zachary nodded. I promised you 3 months to decide if you want a future here. But if I take this position, I'd be divided between duties. You and James deserve better than that. Rose considered his words carefully. Their agreed-upon 3 months were nearly half gone, and while she had found life at Whitetail far more agreeable than she'd anticipated, she hadn't yet committed to staying permanently. What if, she said slowly, the timing is perfect precisely because we're still deciding. This position would be part of your life, Zachary. If I'm to consider sharing that life, shouldn't I understand all it entails? Zachary turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. That's a remarkably sensible way to look at it. I'm a remarkably sensible woman, Rose said with a teasing smile. Most of the time. Only most. Zachary raised an eyebrow, his own lips quirking upward. I find that hard to believe. Well, I did fall rather spectacularly for a certain rancher after knowing him less than a fortnight, Rose pointed out. Some might call that reckless. Some might call it fate, Zachary countered softly. Their gazes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then James let out a delighted squeal, having finally managed to grasp the wooden horse by pulling himself up on the table edge. Bah, he declared triumphantly, waving his prize. Zachary laughed, breaking the tension as he scooped up his son. That's right, James. That's a horse. Can you say horse? I think bah is as close as we're getting for now, Rose said, watching them with a full heart. Later that night, after James was asleep in the small bed that Zachary had commissioned from the town carpenter, Rose stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of Whitetail. Rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen, pastures where horses grazed peacefully, mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that spoke to something deep inside her. Could she make a life here? With this man who seemed determined to prove himself worthy of her trust? Who looked at their son with such tender pride? Who treated her with respect and consideration that she had rarely experienced from any man? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Rose, are you still awake? Zachary's voice was low, mindful of the sleeping baby. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a book. "I found something I thought you might like to see," he said. "May I come in?" Rose hesitated. Though they had been living under the same roof for weeks now, they had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Zachary had never entered her bedroom. "Perhaps we could look at it in the study," she suggested. "Of course." Zachary stepped back immediately. "I wasn't thinking. It's late." "No, it's all right," Rose said quickly, not wanting him to feel rejected. "Let me just check on James, and I'll meet you downstairs." The study was dimly lit, only a single lamp burning on the desk. Zachary had added a log to the fire, which cast a warm glow over the comfortable room. He stood when Rose entered, gesturing for her to take a seat on the small sofa near the fireplace. "It's a photograph album," he explained, sitting beside her close enough to share the book, but with a respectful distance between them. "My mother kept it faithfully until she passed. Then my father continued it in his way. I thought you might like to see what the ranch was like in the early days. And," he hesitated, "there are some pictures of me as a boy. For James, when he's older." Rose was touched by the gesture. "I'd love to see them." They spent the next hour poring over the album, Zachary narrating the story of Whitetail's growth from a simple homestead to the prosperous ranch it had become. There were photographs of his parents as a young couple, standing proudly before a cabin much humbler than the current house. "My father built that cabin with his own hands," Zachary said, his finger tracing the outline of the structure. "My mother always said she fell in love with him watching him work on it." "She must have been very brave," Rose remarked, noting the isolation of the setting. "To come all this way and start from nothing." "She was," Zachary agreed. "Much like you." Rose looked up, surprised by the comparison, and found Zachary watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm hardly, you are," he insisted. "Braver, even. My mother had my father beside her from the beginning. You faced everything alone." "Not by choice," Rose reminded him gently. "No," Zachary acknowledged. "And I will regret that for the rest of my days." He turned the page, revealing a photograph of himself at perhaps 10 years old, sitting astride a pony with a wide grin that showed a missing front tooth. "My first horse," he said, smiling at the memory. Devil was his name, though he was the gentlest creature you could imagine. Rose studied the image, seeing the same determination in the boy's face that she observed daily in their son. "James looks like you." "Poor child," Zachary joked, though his eyes softened as he looked at the photograph. "I hope he has your temperament, though." "I was wild as a young boy, gave my mother fits with my antics." "And what antics were those?" Rose asked, genuinely curious about the boy who had become this steady, responsible man beside her. Zachary laughed. "Where to begin? I once decided to train a wolf pup I found nearly lost a finger when its mother objected. I was constantly climbing things I shouldn't, trees, barn roofs, cliff faces. I broke my arm twice before I turned 12. Rose winced. "Now I'm reconsidering whether I want James to take after you." "Don't worry," Zachary assured her with a grin. "I'll teach him better sense than I had." They continued through the album, the conversation flowing easily between them. Rose found herself relaxing, enjoying Zachary's company in this intimate setting. When they reached the final pages, she was surprised to find more recent photographs, including one of herself. "Where did you get this?" she asked, stunned to see her own image looking back at her. It had been taken during her previous visit to Whitetail, showing her seated on the same porch swing they had occupied earlier that evening. "I had it taken the day before you left," Zachary admitted. "There was a traveling photographer passing through." He looked almost embarrassed. "I wanted something to remember you by." Rose stared at the photograph, then at Zachary. "You kept this? All this time?" "It was all I had of you," he said simply. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had never truly faded despite the separation and misunderstandings. Rose found herself leaning toward him, drawn by an invisible force that had been tugging at her since the day they met. Zachary remained still, allowing her to set the pace. When her hand came to rest on his, he turned his palm up, intertwining their fingers. "I've missed you, Rose," he said quietly. "Even when I was angry. Believing you had chosen not to tell me about James the first missed you." "I missed you too," she admitted. "Every day." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing lightly across her skin. May I kiss you, Rose? As I've been wanting to since you arrived on my doorstep? Her answer was to close the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Rose allowed herself to sink into the embrace, into the feeling of rightness that spread through her. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not just for 3 months. Stay for good. Be my wife, Rose. Let me be a father to James in truth as well as blood. Rose pulled back slightly, needing to see his face. Are you certain? Your life was settled before we arrived. Taking on a wife and child, my life was empty, Zachary interrupted. Filled with work and duty, but empty of joy. You and James have brought that back. He squeezed her hand. I'm not asking out of obligation, Rose. I'm asking because I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day by the creek. The words she had longed to hear, yet scarcely dared to hope for. Rose felt tears well in her eyes, tears of relief, of happiness, of love returned. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Yes, I'll stay. I'll be your wife. Zachary's smile was radiant as he drew her into another kiss, this one filled with promise and certainty. From that night forward, the pace of life at Whitetail shifted again. Preparations for a wedding began, though Rose insisted on a simple ceremony. Nothing elaborate, she told Zachary as they discussed arrangements over breakfast. Just us, James, and the people who matter most to you. And to you, Zachary reminded her. Is there anyone you'd wish to invite? Rose shook her head. My family is gone, and I've been moving too frequently to form lasting friendships. She smiled wryly, a rather pitiful admission for a bride-to-be. Then we'll just have to make sure you form those connections here, Zachary said firmly. Starting with my sister and her family, they're eager to meet you and James. And there are several ranching families nearby, with wives close to your age. True to his word, Zachary arranged a dinner party the following week, inviting his sister Elizabeth and her husband Thomas, along with the Prestons from the neighboring ranch and the young wife of the Newtown doctor. Rose fretted over the event more than she cared to admit. What if they don't approve? She asked Mrs. Hargrove as they prepared the dining room. Of me? Of the situation with James? Miss Kinsley, the housekeeper said with unexpected firmness. I've known most of these folks for years. They're good people who will judge you on who you are, not how you came to be here. She straightened a fork with unnecessary precision. Besides, anyone with eyes can see how happy you've made Mr. Lawson. That counts for a great deal in these parts. The dinner proved less intimidating than Rose had feared. Elizabeth Lawson Turner, a petite woman with Zachary's dark eyes and forthright manner, embraced Rose warmly upon arrival. So you're the woman who's finally captured my impossible brother, she said with a teasing glance at Zachary. I was beginning to think he'd remain a bachelor forever, married only to this ranch. I merely had discerning taste, Zachary replied, slipping an arm around Rose's waist, and the patience to wait for the right woman. The Prestons, Robert and Mary, brought their 3 children, who immediately took an interest in James. Mary Preston proved to be a wealth of practical advice about raising children in the rural Montana territory. The winters are the hardest, she told Rose as they sat together after dinner. But there's nothing quite like watching your little ones discover snow for the first time. Dr. Amelia Collins, the young physician's wife, had moved to the territory only 6 months earlier from Boston. It was quite an adjustment, she admitted with a rueful smile. I still haven't mastered bread making over a wood stove. Neither have I, Rose confessed. Mrs. Hargrove has been patient with my attempts, but I fear the chickens eat more of my efforts than the humans do. By the evening's end, Rose had received invitations to a quilting circle, a community harvest festival, and a standing offer from Mary Preston for James to visit and play with her children. You see, Zachary said that night as they stood together on the porch, watching their guests depart. You belong here, Rose. You always did. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Zachary took his position as county commissioner, which required occasional trips to the territorial capital but allowed him to implement changes he had long advocated for. Rose found herself increasingly involved in the ranch's operations, her education and business, provided by her father before his financial troubles, proving unexpectedly useful in managing Whitetail's accounts. And James thrived in his new environment, growing stronger and more adventurous by the day. He took his first unassisted steps 2 weeks before the wedding, tottering from Rose to Zachary with a look of such determination that both parents burst into laughter and applause. "Duh," he declared proudly, collapsing into Zachary's waiting arms. "Duh." Zachary looked up at Rose, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Did you hear that?" he said, "Dada." "I heard," Rose confirmed, her own heart full to bursting. "His first real word." "The first of many," Zachary promised, lifting James high into the air, eliciting squeals of delight from the boy. "Soon he'll be talking our ears off." The wedding itself took place on a golden September afternoon, with the aspen trees beginning to turn and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and late-blooming wildflowers. Rose wore a gown of pale blue silk, a gift from Zachary that arrived from Helena, along with a dressmaker to ensure a perfect fit. "It matches your eyes," he said when she protested the extravagance. "Indulge me this once, Rose. I want to see you as the bride you deserve to be." They exchanged vows beneath an arch of twisted branches and flowers at the edge of the creek where they had first kissed. James, resplendent in a tiny suit made by Mrs. Hargrove, was held by Elizabeth, though he squirmed throughout the ceremony, eager to be part of the action. "I, Zachary, take you, Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Zachary said, his voice steady and sure as he slipped a gold band onto her finger. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, until death do us part." When Rose repeated the vows, her voice trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment, from that first meeting a year and a half ago, through heartbreak and struggle, to this perfect afternoon surrounded by people who had become family. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Zachary drew Rose close, his kiss a solemn promise before it softened into something tender and intimate. "Mrs. Lawson," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Lawson," she returned with a smile. The celebration afterward was joyful, but modest, a feast prepared by Mrs. Hargrove and several neighboring women, music provided by local ranchers who brought fiddles and guitars, dancing that continued until the stars emerged. James, overtired by the excitement, fell asleep in Mary Preston's arms and was quietly transferred to his bed in what would now be the nursery rather than Rose's room. For tonight and all nights after, Rose would share the master bedroom with her husband. As the festivities wound down and guests began to depart, Rose found herself sitting beside Elizabeth on the porch steps, watching Zachary bid farewell to the last of the ranch hands who had joined the celebration. "He's different with you," Elizabeth observed. "Lighter. More like the brother I remember from before our mother passed." "He carries so much responsibility," Rose said. "The ranch, the commissioner position, now a family." "Yes, but with you, he doesn't carry it alone." Elizabeth squeezed Rose's hand. "Thank you for that, for bringing back his smile." When the last guests had gone and the house was quiet, Zachary found Rose in the nursery, watching James sleep. He came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. "He didn't even stir during the move," Rose whispered, marveling at their son's peaceful face. "Usually he wakes at the slightest sound." "He knows he's home," Zachary said simply. "Safe. Loved." Rose leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling the truth of his words settle into her own heart. Home. After years of uncertainty and displacement, she had found her place in the world here at Whitetail, with the man who had waited for her and the son who had brought them back together. "Come to bed, wife," Zachary murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Tomorrow begins the rest of our lives." 5 years later, Rose Lawson stood on the porch of Whitetail Ranch, watching the approaching riders with a smile. Zachary led the small procession, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him on a smaller horse rode James, sitting straight and proud at nearly 6 years old. And trailing behind on a gentle mare came 3-year-old Sarah, her dark braids bouncing with each step of her mount, her father's lead rope ensuring she stayed safely connected. "They're back, Mama," called Thomas, Rose's youngest at 18 months, as he toddled to the porch railing. "Yes, they are," Rose agreed, lifting the boy to her hip so he could see better. Looks like they had a good ride. The years had brought changes to Whitetail. The house had expanded to accommodate the growing family. The orchards now included both apple and peach trees, proving Rose's grandmother correct about Montana peaches. Zachary's position as commissioner had led to improved roads throughout the county and a new school in town where James would begin his formal education in the fall. But the most profound changes were less visible: the deep roots of love and trust that had grown between Rose and Zachary. The bonds of family strengthened through shared joys and occasional sorrows, the community connections that now sustained them all. As the riders drew closer, Rose could hear James chattering excitedly to his father about the hawk they had spotted, while Sarah sang a made-up song to her horse. Zachary's face, turned toward his children, shone with such open happiness that Rose felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life they had built. He looked up then, catching sight of her on the porch. His smile deepened, becoming the special one he reserved just for her. "Look who's waiting for us," he called to the children, pointing toward the house. "Mama!" Sarah cried, waving enthusiastically enough that she nearly unseated herself. James, more dignified now that he considered himself practically grown, merely raised a hand in greeting, though his smile betrayed his excitement to share the day's adventures. They dismounted at the hitching post, Zachary lifting Sarah down while James handled his own horse with practiced ease. Thomas squirmed to be put down, eager to join his siblings, and Rose set him on his feet to toddle down the steps. "Careful there, little man," Zachary said, catching Thomas as he nearly tumbled on the last step. He swung the boy up onto his shoulders, earning delighted giggles. "Did you see any deer, Papa?" Thomas asked, patting Zachary's head for emphasis. 2 does and a fawn, Zachary reported. "And James spotted a bald eagle's nest." "I want to see," Thomas declared. "Next time, when you're bigger," James said with the authority of an older brother. "The trail's too steep for little kids." "I'm not little," Thomas protested. "You're littler than me," Sarah pointed out, taking her mother's hand. Rose exchanged an amused glance with Zachary over their children's heads as they all moved toward the house. These good-natured squabbles were the soundtrack of their lives now, the beautiful, ordinary music of a family together. Inside, Mrs. Hargrove had prepared lemonade and cookies, which the children fell upon with enthusiasm while recounting the morning's ride in overlapping narratives. Rose moved to the kitchen to help with lunch preparations, but Zachary caught her hand, drawing her back. "Walk with me a moment," he asked quietly. "Curious," Rose nodded. "Mrs. Hargrove, would you mind?" "Go on," the housekeeper said with a knowing smile. "These 3 and I will manage just fine." Zachary led Rose out the back door and along a path that wound through the garden she had planted in their 2nd year of marriage. Late summer flowers bloomed in profusion, attracting butterflies and bees that moved lazily in the warm air. "Is everything all right?" Rose asked when they reached the small bench beneath an apple tree. "Everything is perfect," Zachary assured her, guiding her to sit beside him. "I just wanted a moment alone with my wife." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Happy anniversary," he said, placing it in her hands. Rose looked up in surprise. "Our anniversary isn't until next month." "Not our wedding anniversary," Zachary clarified. "Today marks 6 years since you arrived at Whitetail with James. The day that changed everything." Touched that he remembered the date, Rose carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small silver frame. Inside was the sketch of baby James that Mrs. Delaney had sent, the one that had first alerted Zachary to his son's existence. "I thought we should preserve it properly," Zachary explained. "It's the first image of our family, in a way, the beginning of all this." He gestured to encompass the ranch, the house, their life together. Rose traced the simple drawing with her fingertip, remembering the desperate young mother she had been, the long journey to find this man, the fear and hope that had warred within her as she knocked on his door that rainy night. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "not just of being turned away, but of what it would mean if you welcomed us, of learning to trust again, to love again." "I know," Zachary said, taking her hand. "I was afraid too, of failing you both, of not being the man you needed." Rose smiled at him. This man who had become so much more than she had dared to hope for: partner, lover, father to their children, the steady center of her world. You said something that night, she reminded him. You whispered. I missed his first word, but not his life. Do you remember? Zachary nodded, his eyes growing distant with memory. I do. I made myself a promise in that moment that I would never miss another important moment if I could help it. And you haven't, Rose said softly. You've been there for every step, every word, every triumph and tear. As have you, Zachary replied, drawing her closer. We've built this life together, Rose. Everything good in my world begins and ends with you and our children. In the distance, they could hear those children's voices raised in laughter, the sound carried on the gentle breeze. Soon they would need to return to the house, to resume the happy chaos of family life. But for now, in this quiet moment beneath the apple tree, Rose leaned into her husband's embrace and gave thanks for the courage that had brought her to his door that stormy night, the night that had truly been the beginning of her life, rather than its end. I love you, Zachary Lawson, she whispered against his cheek. And I love you, Rose Lawson, he answered, his voice rich with certainty. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we're granted together. Their lips met in a kiss that held the sweetness of remembrance and the promise of future joys, a perfect moment in a life built on love, trust, and the family they had created together.